Just going live now.
Very good, kia ora koutou. Now, can we count how many in? Does it come through in my chat how many people there are, or can you only see that, Sarah? Okay, well, kia ora koutou, everyone. Hello, my name's Peter Kelly, and with me is Julie Muir. But for those that don't know, I'm the Chief Executive here at Central Otago District Council, and I'll ask Julie to introduce herself.
Yes, so I'm the Group Manager for Three Waters at Central Otago District Council.
Thanks, Julie. Now, look, we're here to talk to you about Southern Water done well. And we're currently out consulting with the community, and we started the consultation on the 9th of May, and it runs to June the 6th. And we'd be interested in hearing commentary, submissions from the community as to what you think about what we are putting forward as our preferred option for Southern Water done well. And if you don't know, or you can't recall, you'll recall back to the previous Labor government and their Three Waters reform. And during the last election cycle, the National Party, the coalition, said they would repeal that law and introduce a new government reform for Three Waters. Well, they did, and they've called it Local Water Done Well. And so they've passed 2 sets of legislation requiring the introduction of this, with a third piece of legislation coming to the House probably in October of this year. And what all that means is all councils up and down New Zealand who deliver water services have to develop a water services development plan and submit that to the government by September this year. But with that plan, we have been required to also go out and consult with the community on what we think are the options and what is our preferred option. So you'll see that in there. And essentially, what we're planning on doing as a preferred solution is to partner up with Waitaki, Clutha and Gore District Councils, and all 4 of us deliver water services in a joint council-controlled organisation to our community. But we'll get into that as we go through, and we're happy to take questions. You can file them away in the chat group or at the end as well. Next slide, please, Sarah. Yeah, so how did we get here? Well, for whole sorts of reasons, really. There's a whole lot of cost increases to water services. Up and down the country, we have ageing infrastructure. We have a much stringent regulatory environment we have to operate in with the water regulator. And as well as some underinvestment up and down the country, it sort of led to where we are today. But the last 2 governments both have required reform of one kind or another for the water. And now with the coalition government, we are delivering on their reform program. And essentially, it's we're having to rethink how we deliver water services, and particularly with future generations in mind. And the next slide, and Julie might have some comments on the next slide.
So what the government's expecting us to do this to help address New Zealand's long-standing water infrastructure challenges. I think all the governments, the previous Labor government and the current coalition government, are both recognising that the current system's not really going to meet the needs of our communities going forward. So they've both come up with variations of plans to how we can address that. And what we're required now is to develop a model that works for our community and meets new regulations within an expected timeframe. So the 1st of July 2028, we're required to be meeting be compliant with all the government's regulations regarding water, wastewater and stormwater, and be doing that in a financially sustainable manner for our communities. Next slide, Sarah.
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in here and Julie just chime in as well. So, what are the things that we do have to consider when we work our way through the Water Services Development Plan? And this is true of every council that's delivering water services in New Zealand. We have to understand the financial impact on ratepayers, We have to look for operational and capital efficiencies. We have to be cognizant of the regulatory requirements because, as we have said, they are getting more stringent. We have to have a think about cost sharing across ratepayers. So, for instance, we districtise water in Central Otago District Council, so everyone pays the same for water if you have a connection, whether you're in Ranfurly, Teviot, Cromwell, or Alexandra, albeit there is a bit of a volumetric charge, so heavy users pay a little bit more. But that's not necessarily true of how other councils do it. So this issue around cost sharing across ratepayers has been one that the mayors and others have given their mind to, some thought to. So in the initial options, if we go down a path of a joint CCO, that's something that we will be ring fencing. And so that the revenue accrued and costs accrued in each district will be apportioned just across their district. So there won't be any harmonisation of prices at this point in time. Environmental, social, cultural impacts are things we have to consider. Asset values of the variety of assets, and this council has about $1.2 billion in assets, and if there's a large chunk of that is associated with water. Debt, how are we going to fund the capital investments required? And for a large chunk of that will be through borrowings. Best options for funding opportunities, and the borrowing level to fund upgrades, because as the graphs will show later on, there is a significant increase in costs for water over the next 9 years that we've forecast in our long-term plan, and that's true going across the other partner councils, and it's true going across all councils in New Zealand. There's a significant uptick in investment in water. Next slide, please.
So harmonisation, just there's a question there, that's when prices are made consistent across a large area, and that's not a necessity. That doesn't have to, that can be part of the constitution of the organisation that the different councils sign up to around what the plan for harmonisation would be. And as Peter just suggested, that it's likely that that will be ring fenced for each council, and there's not necessarily any intention to go into price harmonisation from the beginning. So where to from here? Well, we did start this conversation in our long-term plan, and we're looking at 3 options. So we're looking at a jointly owned council controlled organisation amongst the 4 councils in the southern area here, or alternatively a standalone council controlled organisation. So in that you would just have Central Otago District Council with their water services sitting in a separate entity all on their own, or an in-house business unit. So we currently operate in-house, but the in-house business unit option is different. It's not exactly the same as what we do now, because the legislation that's coming out will require us to have a separate set of accounts, annual reports, separate audit requirements. So there will be sort of duplication that occurs even if that work stays within council. Anything else there you'd like to add, Peter?
Look, but what is up on this page is the link to the consultation document, and we'll talk to this at the end as well, but that link will take you to the Central Otago District Council's webpage and the Let's Talk platform, and then when in there you would find the Southern Water Done Well top of that page, and the Let's Talk platform, and there you'll find the consultation document, the supporting material. There's 2 reports, financial analysis is completed by Morrison Lowe, and some other supporting documentation as well. There's also a podcast in there that talks about this. So there's a range of information in there at that link. Next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so what is this going to cost us? And again, you may want to have a look at the Morrison Lowe report to get a sense of where these numbers have come from. But essentially, these numbers are based off each council's long-term plan. We ourselves at Waitaki have just completed theirs along with Gore, or in the process of completing their long-term plan. Clutha did theirs last year. So the numbers have pretty much been pulled straight out of there and worked out to have a think about, if you come into a joint CCO, what are the sorts of efficiencies that you might arrive at? what's a standalone council-controlled organisation look like, which is essentially it's the council-controlled organisation is, as alluded to, it's essentially a joint company with all councils being equal shareholders. A standalone is just one council, has 100% shareholdings. It has a professional board over the top and directors, and they appoint the chief executive who runs the company within the in-house business unit. But look, what the modelling has shown us, and you can look it up for yourself, but in our professional opinion, the joint council CCO is the least expensive option for this region going forward when in comparison to the other two options. And principally part of that is because of the efficiencies that can be accrued, and that there's some more reporting that we're getting done around efficiencies and what sort of costs that can drive out of the business. But at the moment, all the evidence supports that the joint council controlled organisation is the least expensive option. It doesn't matter, out of all the three options, all costs are going up in the water space. And so that's where we've landed. We also think the non-financial benefits of a joint council CCO also outweigh the other two options, because there's greater synergies, there's greater economy of scale. We all have small teams in the water space. We can pull those scarce resources of our human capital and get greater value for money by sharing the staff effort and the numbers around the district or the region to provide a greater scale for the work that we all have to do. But as I say, those numbers are in the Morrison Lowe report, which you can find on our webpage if you want to drill into it a little bit more.
And
Next slide, please.
I think even on that, Peter, the Morrison Lowe report takes quite a conservative sort of approach to the efficiencies that can be achieved. There has been a peer review done which suggests that the efficiencies of a joint CCO could be greater, so there could be further opportunities for that to have cost savings in it. So the household charges, that these graphs are showing that the jointly owned CCO does provide a slightly lower price path, but it would be fair to say that for Central Otago District Council, there's not a massive amount of difference in it, but enough to make it clear that that joint CCO certainly will be cheaper than doing the standalone CCO, which would be the most expensive option.
Yeah, and just picking up on Julie's point as well previously about the efficiencies in that, you can sort of see in this graph here, the lower line represents a Southern jointly owned CCO, and the dashed line is the CODC in-house business unit. And when you look at it, you think, well, there's not much difference, and that's because in the initial modelling, the Morrison Lowe were pretty conservative in what they thought the efficiencies gained would be. And some reporting that Julie just alluded to, we had a company called Concept have a look at it all. And they've sort of estimated over the first 9 years that they think there's efficiencies in the order of between 43 and maybe $56 million to be found within this joint construct. And that over time that gets more pronounced. And we'll probably be putting that report once we get the final draft up online on our website, so people can have a look at that as well when it comes through. Next slide. Yeah, now what this shows is one of the things that is in the legislation is that because the cost of water and the infrastructure that's required, the level of investment that's required is significant. And even for our own council, I think we're budgeting for 300 million in capital cost over the next 9 years, and there's probably another associated $100 million in OPEX cost for water over the next 9 years. So that's a significant level of investment. And for a council like ours, typically for big capital investment, you would loan fund that, and you would pay that off over, depending on the nature of the project and the financial limit, over 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years of funding to loan fund that. And currently, our limit on loan borrowing is at that green dash line, which is essentially about 175% of our revenue. So we effectively could not have any more debt than about 130 odd million dollars presently, or would be in breach of our financial requirements that we have to operate within. And so under that, we had to consider, depending on what the solution is going forward, and if the councillors vote for a slightly different option than a CCO, then we needed to make sure we had a credit rating from one of the regulators. So we've got a credit rating from Fitch. That means that our debt to revenue now is the yellow line, or is the red line actually at the top of the page. That's 280% of revenue, and the yellow line is probably the enforced limit that you would have, and that's probably about a 250% limit. So on say $50 million revenue, then we could, on 5 times that, we could get up to the order of a lot more than what we're doing now, and give us some financial headroom. But the challenge we see is that going forward in the dark blue line right at the very top is the investment levels that we have determined that are necessary over the next 9 years. And as you can see, it cuts that green line and it cuts the 200% barrier. And so it's starting to impinge on our ability to borrow money. And that's just purely for water. That's for nothing else that we do in council. And so what the government have done in the legislation is they said to all councils, if you form a single council CCO or a joint council controlled organisation, you will be able to access debt at greater levels. So they have said you could access debt at 500%. And so most councils would probably, in the order, that's probably about 450 odd % that you'd be looking at. And so what that means is that a water services entity established in a CCO will have significant ability to borrow funds and invest in the infrastructure that's required. Instead of councils having to balance their investment over a series of years, this water services company could look at some of the bigger projects, and it will have the financial headroom to be able to address things in a meaningful way over the first 9 years of the plan, and in particular to make sure that they meet the regulatory environment that has been imposed upon them. And as Julie talked about, by 2028, there's some requirements here that the new water services entity or in-house business unit is going to have to meet. And so this was one reason why we said our preferred solution is a joint CCO, because we get greater financial headroom, and we can harness that to make sure that we can do the investment when it's required at the appropriate level, and fund it through intergenerational loans over time. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, I guess this just talks to, this is CODC's in-house debt. So if you look at 2034, 2035, you will see that we are anticipating up to $300 million in spend on water infrastructure. That sort of middle dark blue greyish line is the debt that we would incur in everything else that we do in council. And the green is where we have currently debt capacity. And so if we were to do nothing and proceed with the in-house option, then you would see that by 2034, 2035, we have effectively consumed up all that debt headroom we had in the 3 water space. So, a council at that time, 2034, 2035, is doing a lot of water, but it's probably not doing much more because it just won't have the budgetary depth to be able to do much more, because everything is consumed in the water space. So this is why I said that for small councils like ourselves, partnering up with others and leveraging a greater access to loan funding from the local government funding agency is a preferred pathway, because it means that we can meet the level of investment that's required over the next 20, 30, 40 years.
And I think that's important, you know, when we think about the sorts of work that council's got ahead of it, because we do also have an ageing bridge network that's going to need a bit of investment in it. And if this headroom's all being taken up meeting compliance requirements on water, there's not going to be that ability to invest in sort of rural bridges. Some of the, you'll end up with weight restrictions coming in, detours, that sort of thing in place.
Yeah, no, that's right. And next slide, please, Sarah. Yeah, so look, so there is a lot to this, and we've only touched on a little bit of it. I would encourage you all to go to the website to read the consultation document, look at the supporting documentation by Morrison Lowe, have a look at the frequently asked questions, and have a look at the submission form, fill it out, tell us what you think. We received 1,200 submissions for the recent long-term plan, and I can tell you when members of the community respond to consultations in that number, it means that the decisions that councillors make are much more informed because they've heard from a greater sector of our community. In the LTP, there are probably 260 odd school students submitted for the first time, and about 900 odd adults. So it meant that there was a lot of submissions that all the councillors read, that they could consider what people have told them, and then when it came to the decision making, take that all into consideration when they reach their decisions. And equally it's true for this consultation as well. So we're consulting at exactly the same time that Waitaki, Clutha and Gore are consulting, and we're all asking our community the same question. There's three options. Our preferred option is a joint council controlled organisation, but we now want to hear from what the community have to say, and tell us what their thoughts are on that.
Yeah, and you know, we're not. This is common. This is happening right across New Zealand at the moment. There's particularly a lot of entities looking at being set up in the North Island. In the South Island, I think Timaru and Mackenzie District Council are also looking to set up another organisation.
Yeah, so unless Sarah, MJ, are there any questions out there from anyone?
None at the moment.
Okay.
Just the ones that have come through on our social chat.
Okay. Look, and I would, under the frequently asked questions on our webpage, we are putting up answers to questions that people are posing to us, and that sort of stuff. So look, there's quite a bit coming through in commentary, and we're only too happy to answer.
So we do have a question there now about what is the current state of Three Waters assets in Central Otago. So look, I think you know, every council in New Zealand would say there's some things we do very well and there's some things that we need to do better at. Certainly in terms of water treatment, we've done, you know, some really significant investment in the Alexandra Clyde area with the Lake Dunstan water supply, and we're, you know, people will be aware that we're starting work now on Cromwell, and we will be announcing that we're letting a tender for Ranfurly and Patearoa in the next week. All of those water supplies, once they've had the work done on them, will comply with the New Zealand drinking water standards. At the moment, Ranfurly, Patearoa and Cromwell do not meet the standards. They don't have protozoa barriers on them, and we're required legally to get those in place actually around, you know, around Christmas time this year. In terms of wastewater, we're doing pretty well at the moment. Our plants are operating generally within their consent limits, but that has taken quite a bit of work. We're certainly going to need to do quite a bit of investment in Alexandra. It's an ageing plant. It's got one processing line through it, and we've got a lot of growth happening in this area. And if we don't upgrade that plant, if something breaks down, we end up with some pretty significant environmental impacts with the discharge going straight to the river there without getting that adequate level of treatment. Likewise at Cromwell, with all the growth going on, we're going to have to do some upgrades at that plant to improve the capacity there. Compliance-wise, we're hoping to get our compliance all addressed within the next couple of years, but longer term, we've got a lot of growth challenges that we need to face. So while we do have development contributions that ultimately fund the growth, often we have to borrow money to do those upgrades up front so that it services growth over a period of time, and then the growth will pay down those loans once the work's done. So we still need to have access to debt capacity to do that work.
And just a couple more questions to come in. I'll just go to the last one first. As in, private companies set up to operate drinking water. Okay, so yeah, the company the water services entity is a company under the Companies Act, structured along the lines of a professional board, chair, and the councils are the shareholding councils, would be shareholders of the company. And in the legislation, it's quite clear no dividends are to be paid, no profit is to be made. It is all about meeting the investment of water going forward. It is not in a private type business where it's out to make money. These aren't in that, and the legislation is pretty clear on that. The other one was, what will the impacts be on residents on rural schemes, small scale water treatment, septic tank systems and the likes? Well, I mean, we do have small schemes. Julie can talk to us, but we've got St. Bathans,
Yeah.
Ultra Miller's Flat come to mind. At the moment, they are not part of this, but I can tell you with the water regulator, eventually, I suspect water regulators will start to focus on everyone that delivers water to more than just a handful of people, would be my guessing on that. Julie, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, so those private supplies that are not run by council, basically they can continue to run as private supplies. But under the legislation, if those private suppliers, and if the water regulator starts giving an increased focus, which we anticipate that in time they will do on some of those, if they are struggling to meet the requirements, then the fallback position there is that councils are required to provide assistance for the running of them and in meeting the legal requirements if the water regulator tells us to do so. So there's quite a liability there long term if that happens, but certainly there's no intent that they're going to be included in any kind of a CCO at this point.
Yeah. And there's another question that says, would we pay a separate 3 water rate to the CCO? If so, would our current rates reduce? So the answer is yes and yes. Look, in the long-term plan, if you read the long-term plan consultation document, it's still up online. You can still look at that. If you look at the financials, you will see that we were predicting a rates rise of, in the long-term plan, it was 13% for this year, 6% for year 2. And then you would see that it was actually dropping 27%. Because and principally that's because we, in our proposition for the LTP, we said that our preference would be to create some sort of CCO. We'll test that out in subsequent consultation. And we thought that a CCO established in the 1st July 2027 would be about right. So what we did in the LTP at that point in time is we then had to transfer out the budget of the water, all revenue, all costs, because that's what we said our preferred solution is. And so you'll see that rates will significantly come down from a council perspective because we are no longer rating for water. But it is true to say that the water services entity would be charging for water. And so I could imagine it's a little bit like Auckland. Auckland ratepayers would get a bill from Auckland City Council for rates, and it would get a water charge from Watercare. So 2 separate invoices in that particular case.
Mm.
Now, I think that's the end of all questions.
So those small private suppliers, unless those private suppliers approached council or the CCO and said, look, we want you to pick these up, then there's no intention to go for us to go in there encourage that to happen. We will have to be talking to the private suppliers later this year because we've got a legal requirement to understand where people get their water and their wastewater services from when they're not on council supplies, but they're not intended to be part of the CCO, unless of course those private suppliers approached us and said we need some help. Yeah, I
If
think
push
as I
comes to
said
shove,
yeah.
yeah, it's interesting because what I know in some cases, and with councils nearby who are taking on private supplies, they are requiring the private suppliers to increase their funding to bring those plants up to a reasonable standard, and then they have a targeted rate applied to them as well to make sure that they're brought up to the standard over a period of time, and that the ratepayer isn't picking up something that perhaps has been underinvested over a period of time. So there's a whole lot of ways these can be done, but I know that's how that's been done in councils on our boundaries.
So
another one, developers. Yeah, you go, Julie.
Yeah. So development contributions will continue to be paid. The government is changing the legislation around development contributions and changing them to development levies. We haven't exactly seen what that is yet, but certainly the government's intent is that developers will continue to fund the appropriate cost of growth infrastructure costs, and we wouldn't anticipate that there'd be a lot of change to that occurring going forward. It probably is more of an issue within the Central Otago area than maybe some of our neighbours because we have a lot more growth. But everyone will be, each of those areas will have a development contribution requirement on them.
Well, I think we've come to the end of the. Oh, there's another one. It will never be possible for small suppliers.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So some members of my team actually sat in on a webinar given by the water regulator a week or so ago around endpoint treatment. They've got things that they called acceptable solutions, and they've now created a new acceptable solution for endpoint treatment. And so we are actually going to look at making that webinar available to the public so that people who are on the small private supplies can actually access that maybe through our website and look at it. But it's certainly now a valid option to put a lower cost endpoint treatment on some of those small supplies that didn't exist previously. It's just very recently come out.
Yeah, that's a positive. Like I say, it wasn't considered previously, but it now has been factored in because they know that that's going to have a material impact on many small suppliers. If they had to meet a higher stringent standard and build a plant, it wasn't necessarily, the level of investment was beyond the small suppliers.
And look, I think, I know I was talking with the chief executive of the water regulator early on when they were set up, and when they initially looked at things like private supplies, they hadn't anticipated just the sheer number of private supplies that there were in New Zealand. So they've sort of been learning some of this things. They've gone and they've been coming up with more pragmatic solutions for some of these problems as they've eventuated.
Yeah. And look, I think we've come to the end of the questions, and I guess, yes, to close, look at this. I mean, we think this has been an evolving space, but Waters has been an evolving space for the last 6 years since the previous government kicked off their government reform. And so we're now into the second iteration of another government's reform, and we are on some very tight timelines. We have to produce a report to government by early September, which says what we're going to do. And so this consultation is pretty crucial to that. So please go to our website, have a look at all the information there, and send us your thoughts, because as I say, councillors are genuinely interested in reading what the community have to say. and it'll help them make a more informed decision if they hear from as many of our community as possible. So look, thank you for the time, and if you have any further questions, you can approach us on our council website and email us there, and we'll be able to get back to you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Okay. Good night.
Thanks. Thanks. Good night.
That wasn't a
Whoever
bad
awesome
session.
was, thank you.
That was really good.